I would say we're pretty fortunate though, because it's usually they're booked through December and it's like January to February that are slow here for the larger homes. Our smaller spaces, our studios, our two bedroom, I mean, we run an 80-90% occupancy year round here typically. We do start to see a slowdown and then a lowering of rates like in November. We've not seen that slowdown yet.
This is episode number 88 of the Short-Term Rental Success Stories podcast. Are you an investor that's looking to have your home professionally managed? Go to cohostit.com for more information. Welcome back to Short-Term Rental Success Stories. I'm your host, Julian Sage. This is a show where I talk to hosts about their journeys in starting and growing their short-term rental business. My goal is that you'll be able to walk away with practical information that'll help you become a better host and learn how to scale your business. Like any exceptional host, we all strive for 5-star reviews, so please go on over to iTunes and let us know what you enjoy, as it really helps support the show. If you haven't done so already, go on over to our Facebook group, The Host Nation, to connect with the community. Hey, what is going on, Host Nation? I'm super excited to be back again with you this week. Today, I had the honor of speaking with Megan McCrea. Megan is a short-term rental operator in Nashville, Tennessee, with 6 properties, all of which she owns. Megan has been in the short-term rental space for about 4.5 years and had no prior experience to real estate investing or management. In 2.5 years, she was able to replace her income from her W-2 and go full-time into management. Megan is also the president of NASTRA, the Nashville Short-Term Rental Association, which has been instrumental in bringing together hosts and helping to make changes to Nashville's turbulent regulation changes. Without Megan and the association, Nashville would be a very different place than it is today. So thank you so much to Megan and to all of the hosts that have been a part of that association for the work that you've been doing. It's because of the work that these associations are doing and helping to bring and unify these voices that hosts like ourselves are able to manage properties in these markets. If you're interested in investing or short-term renting in Nashville, definitely recommend you get connected with NASTRA because they are going to be up to date on the latest regulations. And we all know how challenging it can be to try to find out, what is the state of short-term rentals in these different markets. So of course, in the show notes of this episode, you can go and you can find NASTRA, get connected, get plugged in, and find out exactly where and what you can be doing in Nashville. In this episode, Megan shares her experience of falling into short-term rentals, the challenges of leaving a well-paid career to pursue full-time management, how Nashville's regulations have been affected, and what it's like being the president of a short-term rental association. If you'd like my show notes for this episode, go to shorttermsage.com/STR88, or if you'd like my show notes sent directly to your inbox every week, then go to shorttermsage.com/show notes. With all that being said, on to this week's conversation. Hey, welcome back, Host Nation, to another episode of Short-Term Rental Success Stories. In this episode, I have the special honor of speaking with Megan McCrea. Megan, would you please introduce yourself to the Host Nation, let them know who you are, and what inspired you to get into short-term rentals?
Sure. So I am Megan McCrea, and I am the hostess and owner of Southbound Stays. We are, and when I say we, that's my husband and I, we have 5 traditional short-term rentals in Nashville and a nearby suburb of Nashville called Leapers Fork. And then we have one, what we call extended stay, or what most people now are calling midterm stays.
Awesome. And do you mind sharing a little bit of backstory? Like how'd you end up falling into the short-term rental space?
Yeah. So like everybody else, I think it was by total accident. It was about 4.5 years ago. And the year prior to that, I had been laid off from a job in the corporate world. I started with the Gannett Company, which was a media company, when I was 15 years old, and just never really saw any other future possible option for me than that. And so when I got laid off, it was sort of a rude awakening, to say the least. And I remember thinking and talking to my husband saying, we'll never be here again. Like we always need a plan B. We actually called it something I probably can't say on air, but we'll call it plan B for the purpose of this. And once I got another job, which was actually pretty quickly, and it really didn't, put us down that much. We bought an investment property that had 2 houses on the property, and we decided we would try one short term and one long term and just sort of see how it went. And if something ever happened where we either wanted to or had to leave our jobs, we could always move into one or the other of those and cover the mortgage. Kind of, I think that's how you started too, if I remember correctly. So that was sort of our plan B. And I remember just thinking, like, I mean, hey, if we make $100 a month, just enough to like put in the bank to cover when expenses come up, and at the very least, we cover the expenses, we'll be happy. Um, and I think we made that in our first weekend of renting short term. And so we just decided to put all of that money as it came in toward buying more properties. And my background is in marketing and advertising, so that part of it, marketing on Airbnb and VRBO, now Verbo, even just telling our friends and family about it came pretty naturally. What I didn't expect was to love the interaction with guests as much as I did, and it sort of became a bit of an addiction. And so one thing led to another, both from the financial part and then just really liking the whole process of dealing with guests and then meeting other hosts. And yeah, that's kind of where we started, and here we are today. It's my full-time thing. I've left the corporate world on my own accord this time, and I'm very happy to have the flexibility and, I guess, fulfillment that comes with it.
So that first property, you purchased that duplex in Nashville?
Yep, and it was like it's a primary house and then it has a guest house. So it's not a traditional like duplex setup, but kind of the same concept.
Okay. And about how long after did you keep it, like one long term and then a short term in the other suite, or did you end up converting the whole thing?
Yeah, so we've kept the original one that was short term, we kept short term. The one that was long term, we rented on a traditional long term basis, like year leases, up until about a year and a half ago. And then that is the one that we converted to what we call the extended stay. Legally, here, you can only have one short term rental per actual property. And so we couldn't do a traditional short term there. But we furnished it and market it, at the 30 to 90-day mark. And it stays insanely busy. That was kind of another one where we were just like, well, hey, I have an addiction to buying furniture, and we had enough that I was pretty much able to furnish it without buying much more. So we figured we'd try it, and it ended up working really well. We're very happy we did that.
What were some of the struggles along with purchasing an investment property, getting into the short term space? Was this your first long term and first short term um, property? So what were some of the challenges that you faced with that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think just like everybody, you don't know what you don't know. You only hear the fun side of things. So, a lot of and again, because I liked the marketing and advertising side of it, um, I never really thought of the things that could go wrong, right? Or we always had such great guests that on the off chance there was, I wouldn't say even a bad guest, but maybe just a messier than normal guest. And things like not realizing that we needed multiple sets of literally everything, right? So your sheet sets, and at the time I was working full time, so I'd get a call in the middle of the day and the cleaners going, we have stains, I can't get out, do you want me to just put them back on the bed? And or somebody spilled something on the bed skirt. That was a big lesson. Don't ever buy a bed skirt, always buy a platform bed. um and then just realizing that as much as you want to sell the property, you want to be realistic about the property as well. So one of the things that we've learned is just to add a section, saying if just to make sure this home is a right fit for you, like even though people love it, here are some things that you may not like. And I would say those are some of the biggest things that were definitely a learning curve in general. I mean, I could go on and on about the lessons I've learned. I feel like I still learn every day, especially in a world where we're living in the middle of a pandemic. So,
So you would actually put some disqualifiers in your listing saying like, hey, if you're this type of person, or if you believe these types of things, then this probably isn't the property for you.
yeah, we call them important considerations, and we just say before booking your stay, these are things that you need to know. So that first house that we bought, for instance, it's a 100-year-old home. It's a historic home, and there's old cracks down the wall that are that have been repaired with the plaster, and when you walk, the floors squeak. And to me, I love that. That's part of the charm, and that's why you rent a historic home. And even though you would think that by saying historic 100-year-old home in your listing, people would understand that, but you really have to spell it out and explain that type of thing. I mean, even the front door is original to the house, and there isn't much original to the house. So I have a really hard time parting with that door. I can't part with it, but like it won't, you got to really like hold it tight to get the smart lock to go onto it. And, those are just the kinds of things that we disclose up front so that people understand this is what they're getting when they come. I would rather them know that up front and make the decision. And, hey, we still book at 80 to 90% occupancy year round. So we're getting the right guests by putting that type of thing in there, and we're staying booked.
I've actually heard in the community, people that get into the space, sometimes they may realize like, they maybe they listen to all the podcasts and they hear all the success stories and they're like, yeah, I really want to do this. But then they find out like maybe I don't actually like hosting guests. So what do you think makes the difference between like a person that maybe is really well suited for short-term rentals versus someone like disqualifying them? Like, who are the people that really shouldn't be, hosting guests in this business?
I mean, I think first and foremost, you have to be wired for customer service. I mean, I hate to say people pleaser because I think sometimes that picks up like a negative connotation, but you kind of have to be a people pleaser. And I think you have to get not just like the have the aspect of doing those things, but you actually have to get joy out of them, or you're definitely going to burn out pretty quickly. Even the people that I know that enjoyed it at first, they maybe have one or two bad experiences and they just get burnt out. To me, that tells me they never really got joy out of it. So, I guess I would think of your backgrounds. I mean, even though so many hosts that I meet come from all different backgrounds, you tend to find that they have that in common, that there was some sort of customer service bent to their last gig or whatever they used to do, or they felt like that was missing out of their last job. And that's what they came to host for. So I would say that's something that is first and foremost. You have to be able to think of the guest first and foremost in literally everything you do. And if you're not a people person, I would say this definitely isn't the thing for you. I mean, I look at, there are certainly investors that look at the financial aspect of this, and I don't think that necessarily disqualifies them from investing, but perhaps they should look at somebody else to do the hosting for them, like a property manager, co-host, or something like that.
So you have this property, it's doing really well. Um, at which point did you say like, hey, we really should start acquiring more properties? And do you consider yourself like a avid real estate investor, or was this just kind of like a natural progression?
It was a natural progression. I don't know. I wish I could say that there was more strategy behind it because typically I'm a planner and I'm a pretty strategic person. But I would say that the next two properties were pretty much like it just felt right. I didn't run numbers. I literally had no clue. It was just like, this just feels right. The next two were studios. And my husband and I, it's always been just us for the longest time. And anytime we traveled, like we would want to go to the mountains or something. And the options for just couples were like really, really limited. And it was always these big, huge houses. And we'd end up like paying far more than made sense just for the two of us and not sleeping in four of the five bedrooms. And so the studios, I think, were probably a bit of a more emotional buy versus a logical, strategic one. Um, the next ones, I definitely looked at the numbers, but also still thought of like what guests would use this space. So it was a little bit of, natural progression. And emotion, and then eventually financial and strategic. It's still pretty hard to think of myself as an investor, to be honest with you, just because I guess when you like what you do, it's hard to think of it in any kind of aspect of work or investment other than just like I'm a host, you know? So I guess technically we are, but I don't really like put us in that bucket.
I mean, at around 2.5 years into you hosting, you had around at this point 3 properties, and you were at this point you also left your corporate job by choice to pursue hosting full time.
Yep, exactly. I did a little bit of contract work for that company. It was a really good hybrid move for me because I never disliked what I did before. I actually always really enjoyed it and met most of my friends there because I started doing that literally when I was 15 years old. So that's like how I met people. I traveled the world with that job. So for me, it was like a really good hybrid to be able to do both of those things and then make sure that I wouldn't become one of those people that got burnt out when I started doing it full time. You know, before I left, it was always like, oh, that's a side thing. um, and so now that it's truly a full time thing, I have to kind of pinch myself sometimes and remember, like, oh, this is work, actually, you know?
I mean, leaving leaving a corporate job, like how much time did you spend? Was that like a full career that you were leaving to pursue hosting full time?
Yeah, I mean, I was the senior vice president of global partnership division. So, I mean, it was like a, 50 to 60 hour job. I managed, multi-million dollar budgets and had employees all over the world. So, I mean, it was definitely a big job. And the hosting stuff, like I always had other people help with the operational side of things. And then luckily I had so much flexibility that I was able to often plan my hosting schedule and or my corporate schedule knowing like peak days. So for instance, you know, Mondays are big checkout days. So I would try to travel Tuesdays, and get things done on the hosting side before I left. And then we've always had cleaners or my husband or somebody who would check them if I was out of town as well.
I mean, that's got to be pretty intimidating to leave, a corporate job where you said that you're the vice president. How many years did you have in the job?
With that company, I was in about 6.5 years, but in total, I was 21 years in to the corporate world. So,
Wow. I mean, how can, for people that are, maybe they're not satisfied with what they're doing, or they look at hosting and they really want to jump into it full time. Maybe they're at that point where they're making enough revenue where they really can't start to question whether they should leave that job. Like, what are some of the things that you were questioning prior to making the switch?
oh my gosh, everything. I mean, the financial aspect is huge, right? To this day, it still has not replaced my income fully. Luckily, I have a spouse who works full time and he has a W-2. So we sort of had that cushion and didn't have to think about things like insurance and all that can be honestly really big limiters, what it really boiled down to was like a quality of life for me and also family. And so my grandpa was really sick at the time. And with my travel, it was just like, I just kept feeling like I was being pulled back to Florida. And that would leave me, traveling for work and then not being in Nashville ever. So it really just boiled down to that. And, you have to think about what's best for you. And sometimes, I mean, they always say, money can't buy happiness, right? And so I'm probably the happiest I've ever been. And, I wouldn't say it's the least I've ever made, but it's certainly not what I was accustomed to making on a fixed W-2, especially in the middle of a pandemic. So, but those are the things you have to think about. I mean, obviously finances are certainly a reality that you have to consider. You can't always just follow your heart, but if you can make it work, you have to weigh out, I think, is a little bit of loss and change in lifestyle worth the other benefits that you can gain? And for me, that's what it boiled down to.
So you said that you're working around, 50, 60 hours a week with your previous job. What does a typical day in Megan's life look like now, full time hosting?
Well, I think what I love the most is that there really isn't a typical day. Every day is different, but I think that it's sometimes hard to explain. I tell people like I'm always on, right? You're always kind of 24/7. You need to be there, but then in the same time, you feel like you're barely ever on because somebody may only need you one out of those 24 hours a day. But most of the days, I've been really working hard on getting people to book direct. So I've been doing a lot of like content for our website, content for emails, working with a designer on some new branded items that we're putting in the houses, um, and putting a lot of effort into outreach, social media, that sort of thing. And then operationally speaking, I'm a control freak and I haven't been able to let go of still going over to the houses and checking after every single clean. Luckily have amazing cleaning crew that mostly those checks have turned into pillow fluffing and setting out snacks and gifts and I write a handwritten card for every single guest every single time. So that's most of the day. Shopping, Costco. I see Costco a lot. So I would say that's sort of the life of a host. And then every now and again, you get those crazy calls. Like we had a guest that was very she was, we'll call her directionally challenged. She was very short and the shower curtain rod was too low, and she was like tripping on the curtain liner. And so the other night we had to go over and like put it up for her because she couldn't reach to get it up high. I mean, you just never know. But I think that was the first time I'd actually seen a guest in quite a long time, to be honest with you.
So you leave your job and you're doing this full time. Um, at this point, were you thinking, I have to acquire more properties, or do I have to do more? Like, how did you allocate your time going full time hosting?
Yeah, so we did right around the time, well, I guess it was about a year after I left the corporate job, we did add a larger property, which is our property in a suburb called Leapers Fork. And that was something that I'd been wanting to do for a while, but it's about a 45-minute to an hour drive outside of Nashville. And I just knew realistically while I was working, probably was not going to be an option to do that. So both financially, it made sense to go ahead and do it, but also because it would add obviously to the income and help with like having something to do with my time. Um, but then also just physically, I was able to be there because again, I do like to go out. So I still drive to that house every time there's, before an arrival, after a checkout sort of thing too. But yeah, I mean, it's the one challenge that we've had with acquiring properties, obviously since leaving. I mean, we never had to even think about financing. It was just the easiest thing, we'd save up enough for the down payment and then they'd write us with two W-2s. It was like a no-brainer and all this extra side income. Now it's like, oh, wait a minute, like you've only got one W-2. So I don't think we can acquire as fast as we had hoped for that reason. But now that we've got that history, it's becoming, easier and easier. So
So you have around five properties at this point. You also have an association. It's the NASTRA, the National or Nashville Association of Short-Term Rentals.
yes, yep. Now stress for short.
And at which point did you say like, "Hey, I should really start getting more involved," or was this actually an organization that you founded?
So it was existing already, and that was pretty early on. I mean, I would say within a few months of hosting, because there was a law that was proposed that would basically take away the ability to host in the city at all, even if you were already hosting. So I got involved pretty early on, and just with my background, I started volunteering with the organization and doing, like communications, writing all the emails, sort of interpreting things from our attorney, from legal speak to speak that people understand. And the president at the time, she had some health issues. And right after I had joined the board as the VP, within 30 days, she resigned. So I quickly became the president. We always joke, I'm still the interim president and I'm going on 3 years of that. So I've, been involved literally almost since the beginning and have, pretty much run that organization for, almost since the beginning as well.
So what, I mean, coming into the hosting, a lot of people get into this business and they don't really think about advocacy being such, they don't really think about advocacy. But you said that you got into it because Nashville was planning on basically removing it. How, that's got to be a lot of pressure on you as well. Like when you're, considering leaving your job. Meanwhile, the city is saying, "Hey, we're gonna basically make it so you can't do this job anymore."
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely nerve wracking. And, aside from just the leaving my job part of it, it's, I mean, we own these homes. We can't just back out of a lease. I mean, we were fortunately smart and ran the numbers to make sure that we could rent them as long term if we needed to, and still, at the very least, like cover expenses and cash flow a little bit. Um, but yeah, it's nerve wracking, and it really surprises me how many people don't do their due diligence beforehand before getting into this on what the local laws are of their city, state, municipality, whatever, and or they'll do the research, get the okay, and then just assume it's green light from there. And I think we've seen that, especially with COVID. People who thought, oh well, this is a vacation rental market. That is never going to happen here. And I mean, look at Florida. That was like one of the first places to say no short-term rentals. Who would have ever thought? So I think it's not only something people need to do on the front end, but you need to stay active and engaged with throughout the entire time that you're doing this. You can never take your eye off the ball. I was um, giving a presentation about advocacy at a Vermont host conference that they did, I guess it was a year and a half, 2 years ago now. And I was literally on stage and said almost that exact thing. Like, you always have to stay engaged. You always have to stay watching. We had had about a year of no laws. And no sooner than I got off stage, got connected to Wi-Fi, which is a miracle in Vermont where we were, and had a message from our attorney saying, "Hey, FYI, new law just hit today. Here's what it proposes." And it was like, oh my gosh, like, and we had kind of, I don't want to say we took our eye off of it. Obviously, we still had an attorney, we were still watching, but we weren't like doing as much outreach just because we thought, okay, like surely they've done what they're going to do. There can't possibly be any more. And since that time, there have been 8 more laws. So, needless to say, it's never something that you can let go of.
What is it like, getting so involved in advocacy at such an early part of your hosting journey? Has it altered the way that you operate, or that you interact with the hosting community? How has that been?
It has been the biggest blessing and the biggest curse. So, from a blessing perspective, the fact that I got so engaged so early made me realize I needed to stay on my toes. Really taught me to dot my I's, cross my T's, because not only were we all, under scrutiny here in Nashville, but especially as the head of the organization, you can bet people were looking at our listings for the right way to do it, and trying to catch us if we weren't doing it the right way. Um, meeting fellow hosts in the community, like, you can't put a value on that. That has been a game changer. We all just learn from each other all of the time. All of those lessons that I was sharing. You know, I remember getting the buy black makeup towels tip or washcloths from a fellow host very early on. I was like, why didn't I think of this? So in that way, it's been the biggest blessing. A curse in a sense that, like, I feel like I do have a tendency to look at things a bit pessimistic these days, so even buying a property and stuff like that, like, there's this big lump in my throat that I never used to have. And it's something that, how I was sharing earlier that we bought on emotion and, not very strategically. You really, really have to think about it now. And I kind of hate that I've almost been so close to it that sometimes I forget to see all the positives that could come versus thinking, okay, what's the law here? How could this possibly change? What could the gotchas be? Let me do all the due diligence. And it sort of sometimes like sucks the fun out of the new buys. So, good and bad, I guess.
Hey, this is Julian, and I wanted to be able to give you our newest book, Airbnb Secrets Revealed: How to Build a Fortune on Airbnb Without Owning Property. In this book, we talk about the concepts of rental arbitrage investing as well as co-hosting and how you can build a business leveraging other people's properties. This book is perfect for the new short-term rental investor, and it's something that I wish that I had when I first started, as it would have saved me a lot of trouble and helped me to understand how to be able to leverage the power of short-term rental investing in your own real estate portfolio. If you'd like to get our newest book completely for free, go to shorttermsage.com/free book. Now, back to the show. Nashville is one of those markets that, we increasingly, hear all the time. A lot of people are interested in it, not only from a short-term rental standpoint, but, just from a real estate, multifamily development, a lot of investors in the Nashville area. What are some of the myths, or what are some of the things that people maybe think when investing or trying to acquire properties in Nashville with the intent to short-term rent versus what is actually what you can actually do?
I would say the number one myth is that it's easy. We have for the past 3 years, more than doubled year over year the number of permitted short term rentals on the market here. And one of the reasons Nashville was at the top of every list, AirDNA, and I mean, you name it, Nashville is at the top for being one of the top markets. We sort of had the perfect storm of, at the time, pretty lax rules for short term renting. And we had a severe hotel shortage. We had a hit TV show, and we had 100 net new people moving into the market every single day. So it was literally the best, scenario for any kind of investor to buy here. And from a short-term rental perspective, I mean, you could take cell phone pictures that had a bed unmade and be 20 miles outside of the city and be at 100% occupancy, um, and still be doing well, right? Fast forward to today, and you have, 3 to 4 times the amount of permitted homes. Most of the new homes, because of the laws that have been added in the last, I would say, 2 years, are all pretty well new builds and some sort of multifamily. There are exceptions to that, but by and large, that is, what's been added. And so you've got a lot of competition that, most people are hiring interior designers and, adding all these really cool different things that you really, really have to work at it now. And I see some of the performers that are put out there, and I'm like, I don't even know if like I could make that happen working it as hard as I work it. I mean, I'm in our listings and pricing tools every single day. I don't know many hosts that are. And so, I do worry that people see it as an easy opportunity and then are sorely disappointed. And then that worries me about what might happen to the market if those people then start to sell, pull out, whatever. So it's still very doable. It's still a very attractive market, in my opinion, but it's definitely not as easy as it used to be when it comes to just coming in here and making money.
you've been in this position as the president of NASTRA for quite a while now. With the you've probably been there since the beginning of the surge of the Nashville craze, the Nashville kind of bubble. Have you also noticed, with that increase, a lot of uh, stricter regulations, or like how for a market where that is starting to really blossom, how does that impact legislation?
Well, yeah, I mean, because of that growth and because more and more people were coming in, um, the city really, I think that is the biggest thing that's impacted. Not to mention a lot of multifamily properties were being converted to short-term rentals. And so between that and then the hotels coming on board and adding extra, shall we say, push on our local council, financing, donations, that sort of thing. It definitely, I think those two things, the growth and the hotel lobby, is really what put the push on our local city council to put more in place.
With that increase pressure, has there been a lot more involvement as a president, or like what is it kind of walk through what is a typical day in the life of a president of a short-term rental association look like?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, a lot of it is just trying to understand, I mean, I know we're a little atypical in the number of bills that have been proposed here. Fortunately, for most other cities, they haven't been through the number that we have. So typically, I guess what would happen is we're watching, and I know we have a great board who also is very engaged. So it's not just me, but we have people that are watching to see what bills are being put forward. We often don't get notified. So it's just like watching the different agendas that are published. Once those come out, trying to actually decipher them. What we have learned from our attorney is that something may look fine on the surface, but if there's even a little bit of vague, it could it really impact what I guess how it gets interpreted, right? And so he goes through and sort of points out all of the, well, this could mean that, and this could mean that sorts of things. We regularly speak with our partners at Airbnb, Verbo, our partners that support the community. Price Labs is a great partner of ours, Noise Aware, kind of keeping them filled in and often asking for their help to get the word out. And then just engaging with the community, not only our members, but our non-members as well. Trying to make sure that people are aware so that we have a voice and get people there. And then we've also really tried to go beyond just advocacy and policy and really focus on like networking. It's been a little hard. We used to do monthly get-togethers, so we had a lot of planning and coordination of those, and then reaching out to like partners, like the Music City Trolley, getting them to come to those events so they can network with hosts and whatnot. Now we're just doing like Zoom coffee and happy hours, that sort of thing. So it's a little bit of everything. But I would say the number one thing is just communication on all fronts, talking with codes, talking with the city, talking with our attorney, translating that to members, getting it on our website, getting it on our social channels. And yeah, there's a lot to go into. I wouldn't be able to do it. Our organization has grown so much. I wouldn't be able to do it. We have a great vice president, Elise, who she's a property manager and owner. And she's helped a ton with the communications. And then the rest of our board, doing all the other things to keep the organization running, like finances and memberships.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, that sounds like almost like a full-time job. But is this something that is just like volunteer, or is there like
It
some
is.
type of compensation?
Yeah, it's a full-time volunteer job. So, I mean, as of late, like it hasn't been as full-time as it used to be. Just because, you know, like we had 7 bills up around March when everything started. And then in Nashville, we had the tornado that hit and was really devastating across multiple parts of the city, followed by the pandemic. So a lot of those have been kicked to just the past few months. We have a couple up now. Um, so from a legal perspective, it actually hasn't been that bad. Um, Knock on wood. But we've been trying to do things to engage our members, like lining up webinars for our members, with our different partners and just different topics and tips, and then coffee hours. So we've sort of switched from this heavy legal focus to more of an engagement focus and just trying to keep people positive. It's been a tough year, obviously, for most people, but especially for the urban markets like Nashville.
One of the common questions I always get is, how are short term rentals being impacted right now? And I mean, I think it's like you said, you guys have been hit. You had the tornadoes, there was COVID, there's this legislation. How has Nashville been generally handling short term rentals?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd probably get a different answer from every host here in Nashville. I mean, the first few months, like with the true shutdown that we had, nobody had bookings, right? Most people quickly flipped to hosting medical professionals or midterm stays. Um, Now I think people are in this "what do I do" place. The smaller properties seem to be doing a little bit better here than the bigger properties, which makes sense. Obviously, larger groups aren't traveling. If you haven't heard, Nashville is obviously known for being bachelorette capita of, I think, the world actually now. And so, a lot of those groups' weddings are being postponed. So a lot of those groups aren't coming. And so the larger houses have definitely taken a more significant hit than I think the smaller ones. But we do have several members who converted to long term stays. Whether they stay that way or not, I think is to be determined. I think a lot of people were like, wow, this is a lot easier, and again, because, you know, financially, it used to be super lucrative. Not that it's not still, but it's definitely not what it used to be. And so I think a lot of people are making those decisions and weighing that right now to decide what they're going to do come March, April of next year.
Is right now we're recording this, it's around November 16th. What's the seasonality for Nashville? Is it pretty sporadic, or do you guys have a pretty defined season?
So the larger homes definitely have a more defined season. I would say we're pretty fortunate though, because it's usually they're booked through December, and it's like January to February that are slow here, for the larger homes. Our smaller spaces, our studios, our two bedroom, I mean, we run an 80-90% occupancy year round here typically. We do start to see a slowdown and then a lowering of rates like in November. Um, and our occupancy is more filled by like longer term stays, meaning a week to a month. Um, we've not seen that slowdown yet, which is nice. So by now we would normally be slowing down in Nashville, and we actually haven't. So it'll be interesting to see if some of that pent up demand results in, I guess, a longer peak season for us, right? So rates are definitely lower than normal, just this year as a whole. But we've been kind of inching them up a little as we've gone, and we haven't had to bring them back down. So yeah, so we're still not to last year as far as rates are concerned, but we're over where we were and then I guess the peak of the pandemic. So I think that's probably a good thing. Again, the larger homes, very slow, from what we're hearing from other hosts. But for the smaller hosts, smaller home hosts, it seems like we're getting a bit of an extended season.
Okay. And going back to, you said that the city, they'll propose some different bills. what is that like? Working, with the association when these bills do get proposed. Like what do you typically have to do to be able to do that? Like, are you able to stop them, or do you have to modify them? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, most of the bills that get proposed here get passed. We typically are able to get enough, voice out there. So public hearings, people writing in, engaging the host community to typically get some of the requests for modifications pushed through. So, for instance, pushing dates further out to give people time to plan. Um, Unfortunately, because the city tends to pass most of what they propose, we've had to go to the state level, and we've done that twice now. And that's where we've gotten our reprieve. So the city actually voted to ban all non-owner occupied short-term rentals and would have phased us out by 2019, I think, or 2020. And then the state voted that basically once you had the right, they can't take it away as long as you were doing it legally. So those of us who were operating legally will be able to continue as long as we don't sell the property, so that doesn't transfer to a new owner, or we don't let our permit lapse, or we don't get what we call like our strikes. So over occupancy, the yard's too long, that sort of thing, you could actually have your grandfather status revoked as well.
Wow. And so that's the case right now in Nashville, is that it can only be owner occupied?
There is still non-owner occupied eligibility in certain zones. And then there's a new law that passed that even if you're in an eligible zone, so you could be in a commercial zone where a hotel could go, but if you're within 100 feet of a school, church, park, playground, daycare, the list goes on, you cannot get that. Um, and then they also passed a new, what's called a no short-term rental zone, that we have our first council member trying to apply to an entire neighborhood where you wouldn't even be able to get an owner occupied permit. You just would have no new short-term rentals. So it used to be like, oh yeah, well, if you're these zones, you can do it. And now all of these added layers, it's like, well, these zones only until these dates, these zones after those dates, but check your radius and not this neighborhood. So there's really no straight answer. It's, you really have to do your due diligence if you want a non-owner here.
How are people able to really, I mean, sometimes it's just challenging enough just to find out, like, hey, am I allowed to short to rent? Which particular areas? How is an investor that's coming into the space able to work around like all of these constant changes and finding out what is the where am I allowed to even acquire property, or how can they do that now?
So first, I would say work with a real estate agent that actually knows what they're doing. um, and we have a few listed on our NASTRA website that they can look at. Hire a land use attorney. We also have some recommendations of those to make sure that the property, let them do the due diligence and find and poke holes. You would rather them do it now and pay that small fee up front than pay for a house you can't rent. Um, and then be flexible. I personally wouldn't purchase anything here that would not also be able to suffice as a long-term rental, because from the time you go under contract to the time you close, it could look very different. So you just have to be flexible. You have to understand that that's how it is right now. And I think honestly that probably goes for anywhere, not just Nashville. Is make sure that you're talking with a local attorney, a land use attorney who truly understands and can look at, okay, what is this property really going to be allowed for? And then what could possibly change? What pending laws are out there, that sort of thing, just so that you can make a truly educated decision and not an educated guess.
Has there been a lot of positive regulation changes. I mean, I know that like the Nito building, came up in Nashville. I know that there's also, like you said, that there's a lot of multifamily buildings that are also converting to short term. With all of that interest there, has the city been more positive, or is there just been more pushback from hotel lobby and whoever is opposing these?
Yeah, no, unfortunately, that growth has been more pushback. They want multifamily to be used for residential living. If it's a commercial zone, they would prefer a hotel. So unfortunately, it's probably had the opposite effect. Definitely not a positive outlook, but if anything, it's caused more of the legislation to come down. So the most recent legislation has been aimed at multifamily, for instance.
Where is Nashville really pulling and creating these bills from? Are they originating these, or are they piggybacking off of other counties that have maybe created similar legislation?
No, these we're past, them finding other things. They're just whipping them up on their own at this point, unfortunately. I mean, it's honestly kind of unheard of. And in most people that I talk to, other, host leads from around the country haven't seen anything like this. Even the places that thought they were strict, once they see what we're dealing with, they're like, okay, well, never mind. We've got it easy. So yeah, no, they're just kind of coming up with them. I mean, some of them are like the 100-foot radius thing is like, I forget how old, but like years old beer law, like from bars, and they've applied it to short-term rentals. It's not even the current law for bars and restaurants. It's like an old version of it that they've applied to short-term rentals. Like, where'd that come from? No one can answer, unfortunately.
I mean, you said that there wasn't a strong hotel presence in the area, which is why there was such like a growth of short term rental operators. So why has there just been such a negative pushback to the short term rental community if the hotels really didn't even have a strong foothold there?
Well, they didn't. Now there's been a lot of growth with hotels. So at the time that short-term rentals were sort of emerging, we had like a stated hotel shortage. And so Nashville couldn't grow the tourism essentially without short-term rentals. Even with short-term rentals, we would sell out. Now the city has given tons of incentives to bring hotels in, and they're here in droves. So that would have been, I guess, 4 years ago, 5 years ago when we had a hotel shortage, but definitely supply has caught up to demand even pre COVID.
Wow. So Nashville really was dependent on short-term rentals, but when the hotels, when they started giving the incentives to the hotel lobbyists also came in. They tried to kick away the short-term rentals that really were supporting Nashville at the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I mean, for investors that are, I mean, do you think that Nashville is still a market that people can confidently invest in or build a management company out of, or is it just because that there is so much turbulence in that market that maybe it's better to kind of stay away?
I definitely wouldn't say they need to stay away. I just think they need to be very smart and very selective about it. And again, do the due diligence, but I think I would apply that to any market right now. I mean, Nashville definitely has a lot of extra twists and turns, but I think you run that risk with literally any market. So I think that um, you should always proceed with caution and do your homework and make sure that you always have an exit plan, from whether that's a sell or whether that is from short-term renting into long-term renting, whatever. And I think that this year that showed a lot of people that, and that's something that I hope if we get anything out of this pandemic, people have learned that you need to always have whatever that backup plan is for your rentals. And hopefully we won't ever need that again for like, typically I always looked at it as, well, if one or two isn't doing well, right? Like, what's that plan? Never did I think in a million years I would need if all of them aren't doing well. So hopefully you don't need to plan for that again, but you never know. But I think that people need to always understand that there needs to be that backup, whether it's an investment perspective or, even if it's not laws, it could be a pandemic or the next whatever. There should always be a backup plan.
Being in such a, being the president of an association that is trying to, bring clarity and a voice to short-term rental owners and operators, you know, being in such a turbulent market, do you feel, optimistic with how short-term rental associations and regulations are, or do you feel that because of other people's agendas that short-term rental operators are kind of maybe too easily dismissed?
I feel cautiously optimistic. I think because of the pandemic and some of these cities and states that popped up with these crazy rules during all of that, people who were a little like, oh, that could never happen to me, have realized, oh, that could happen to me. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that I think more people are aware. I think that if we actually used the voices that we have and didn't necessarily have that it could never happen to me or it's not impacting me right now, so I'm not going to do anything, I think we can make a really big difference. I mean, we have sort of a fundamental right of having property rights that I think everyone should be passionate about. And so I think that we could have change. And um, I think we'll see change eventually, but I think it's going to take more than just cities and states. We're going to have a collective effort. And I know that there are groups out there like Rent Responsibly, Astro now. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Even Matt Landau's got an advocacy series that are really starting to like try to get that national engagement on the topic. And I think that that's something that would be really helpful to help the community as a whole. Because, one thing that I've always said is like our worst law, for instance, that we have here in Nashville, like I said, they're kind of just making them up. That could be the law that becomes the model. And you don't want that. So I don't care if you're in Florida or if you're in Canada, like if it's happening somewhere else, you should care because it could eventually come where you are.
And I'm curious as to, you brought up that there's a bunch of, separate organizations. What's the reasoning behind that? Like, I know that like you have a very local niche organization, and different counties are probably going to have their different associations, if any. But why is there so many different organizations popping up and not just one unified?
I wish I knew, honestly. And that's something that I've kind of said, like, I wish we could all like get in sync on this and just get behind one or the other, and I think, yeah, I really don't know why that's happening. It would be helpful if there were just one, especially as leading a local org. It's kind of like dealing with this one on this, and then this person reaches out over here, and this person reaches out over here. And so I think we could get a lot further. I do think they're talking now, though, which is awesome because there were some organizations in the past, and I don't think that that was the case. So at least everyone seems to be talking now and like at least moving in the same direction. So I think that that's really a start. And I hope to see that we progress in kind of a unified message, approach, even quite frankly, putting finances behind, right, in the future.
Awesome. Well, Megan, if you could go back and start from scratch, what would you do differently?
Ooh, for just in general or from the advocacy perspective?
Yeah, in let's say let's do both. We'll do both.
Um, so in general, I would say that I wish I had started smarter, I wish that I had done, connected more with people that weren't just like the marketing side and really understood the operational side from the beginning. I got very lucky that it never turned into a guest issue or a bad review, but it was a lot of stress on me and our cleaner and all of those people that I could have just saved had I been a little bit more prepared in the beginning. So I think better preparation up front operationally, and having processes to start from instead of changing oil on a moving car would have been quite helpful. From an advocacy perspective, um, I I guess I would say I wish it had happened differently because I didn't necessarily start it this way, but the organization, we got fueled when something bad happened. And they started to fight the bill that was around at the time. I wish we had been able to start the organization on more of a fun front, like networking and meet other hosts, and then had already had that engagement when the bills came along. Because it's really taken, and we're still working on trying to change like our image, as being just policy to being like, hey, we help you with other things too. I mean, we do, especially during COVID, I mean, and even before that, we do all topics that are not just related to policy. So we help our hosts with a lot of things. But because we started as that, it's been very hard to like change course and get people that are not part of the organization already to understand that.
Awesome. And what's the best way, Megan, if anybody wants to be able to reach out to you, if they have any other questions, want to stay with one of your properties, what's the best way to get in contact?
Sure. Well, so if they want to stay or probably contact me too, you can do that through Southbound Stays, which is just southboundstays.com. That's our website where they can book direct. And then there's a contact form on there as well. And then LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. So it's just Megan McCrea, MCCREA. But to warn everybody, I'll be taking a bit of a maternity leave here in a few months. So if I don't get back to you quickly, please have patience. I'll probably be dealing with a newborn, once this comes out.
Awesome. Awesome. And if you're listening to this, go on over to YouTube and leave a comment, say congratulations or something. Let's be supportive. And of course, NASTRA will also include a link in the show notes, how you can get plugged into that. If you have any questions as to, getting involved in the Nashville market, maybe Megan's not going to be available right now, but she's also got other people on her team that can definitely help you out. So we'll include everything in the show notes. But thank you so much, Megan, for taking the time. And until next time, Host Nation, keep on hosting.
Thank you so much, Julian. It was nice chatting with you.
Hope you hosts benefited from the show. If you found value, please go on over to iTunes, leave us a review, and let us know what you enjoy about the show. If you'd like to talk to hosts that have been featured in these episodes as well as the community, go on over to our Facebook group, The Host Nation.